All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session of Foundations of Management. I hope you got a chance to reflect on the initial lecture that we had, the first lecture, and you have your own questions. So, if I'm not too sure if there is a group that we have, or there's another medium of reaching out where you can basically ask your questions and exchange ideas. And I hope you got some time to go through the notes of the topic that we discussed the last time, because fundamentally that was the basic of management, the first step of management, right? The I would say the foundations of management. Today, as we move into more specialized topics, right? So just a minute, I'm just grappling with this. Yeah. So we move into the specifics of management, and essentially, if you look at management, that is more of a planning, organizing, directing and controlling activity. And don't forget, all this is done to achieve business objectives, whatever objectives have been laid down by the board, by the senior stakeholders. So essentially, attainment of objectives is the key function for which you have management at play. Now, as we speak, the one important thing here is that there are a lot of technical jargons, there are a lot of definitions that you see in these textbooks. But my humble request to you is, if you relate this to your day-to-day activities and see if it makes sense, because a lot of context has changed over the last maybe, I would not even say 10 years, in the last 4-5 years, because these definitions are old. They are more attuned to the manufacturing setup, correct, and they're more attuned to the old sort of industries, maybe the FMCGs or the consumer goods, or more apt to an assembly line, right? That's why you see a lot of usage of labor and factory in these books. But today, a lot of things have changed. Services have evolved. India is itself moving from an agrarian economy to a services-driven economy, right? So a lot of these things would change with context, and that's the essence of learning this subject. Now, in the last lecture, I spoke about reading definitions without understanding the meaning of those definitions. But only when you experience, when you lead a team and you move up the chain, you understand a lot of these things make sense, because this is trying to give a structure to the overall way things are done. And ultimately, why we're doing this? We're doing this to attain common objectives. Okay, so we'll start with planning. Again, it's a very common term. I mean, it's a very common word, or which is actively used not only in the corporate circle, but in your day-to-day jobs, but also in your day-to-day lives, right? There has to be a plan. What's the plan? That's the very commonly used lingo, right? So if you look, so there are again multiple definitions of planning. There are management gurus or experts who come up with these definitions of planning, right? But essentially, what is a plan? Plan is something which is determining, which gives you a set of facts or gives you the current context, by virtue of which you plan for some future outcome, or you plan for some activities which are lined up in the future. Okay, it is basically what I'll do is I'll read through the definitions and characteristics, right? And we might not pick up all the definitions, right, but try and make sense from an organizational context. So planning is basically based on assumptions, based on anticipations, try to reach an outcome or try to reach objectives based on the current facts or data that we have, right? It also calls for anticipation and mitigation of risks. That's the classical textbook definition, but may not always be feasible, right? Now, no one can anticipate a COVID, right? No one could have anticipated the financial crisis of 2008. Even the experts of experts failed. They couldn't predict. So in such a scenario, I mean, your plan may not be in a position to mitigate all the risks, but it has to be flexible, and it has to be contextual. Like, it should be able to adapt itself so that there is win-win for the plan, right? Now, if I look at the planning is an important function of management. Planning is an activity by which managers present conditions to determine way of reaching a future state, is both an organizational and necessity and a managerial responsibility. Now, there's a very classical saying: if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I forgot the name of the management guru. So that's why it's more of a organizational necessity and managerial responsibility. No, I know. Sometimes people, teams, managers. I mean, I have done that in the past. We gossip in our tea and coffee breaks that all this looks good in a plan, but then is it going to be achieved? But it is a managerial responsibility. So the key word here is so through planning, organization choose goals based on estimates or forecast of the future. Concern for futures is intensified by the fact of relentless, unremitting change. Very, very important. So a plan is supposed to be flexible, but can it be flexible all the time? Are you in a position to anticipate change, which is the only constant? Can we sit down today and see how the next 1 year looks like? And we try to do the financial planning, and we try to do the planning for the next quarter, half yearly and 1 yearly plans. But one thing which is a constant is change, which you can't stop, right? The purpose of planning, in the words of Dalton McFarland, is twofold: to determine appropriate goals and to prepare for adaptive and innovative change, right? So looks very fancy. The definition looks very fancy. Obviously, you have to plan for a goal. You cannot plan if there is no goal. You need to have a goal. The goal could be anything. It could be, let's say, quarterly profits. It could be quarterly revenue. It could be an attrition goal. It could be a business expansion goal. And also to prepare for adaptive and innovative change, meaning you need to adapt to change, and at the same time bring in an element of innovation. Okay, now this is again an overused word in the corporate circles. Okay, so you have to innovate in the context. So in common terms, we are Indians, right? So it's jugaad. So your plan should be flexible, your plan should be structured, but it should also be innovative. Okay, now a couple of definitions here which are lined up. I just like planning is an intellectual process, the conscious determination of the course of action, basing of decisions on purpose, facts, and considered estimates, as per Harold Kuhns and Cyril O'Donnell. So, keywords is it is an intellectual process. It is supposedly an intellectual process where a lot of inputs, thoughts go into a plan, and it is also, the key word here is action, the basis, determination of action for a purpose backed up by facts, right? So intellectual process, you need to have action, you need to plan the course of action, and what are your input variables? They are your facts, okay, and the estimates that you have. The plan of action is at one and the same time the line of action to be followed, the stages to go through, and the methods to use. It's a kind of a future picture wherein approximate events are outlined with some distinctness whilst remote. According to George Terry, planning is the foundation of most successful actions of all enterprises. Okay, so again, the key word here is approximate events are outlined with some distinctiveness. So it clearly states that it is not exactly possible to predict to the T, but yes, some predictability needs to kick in, and it's the foundation of most successful actions of all enterprise. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's anything which is successful for an enterprise is attributed to a plan. Okay, so if something goes right, you will see organizations always say that, okay, it was all planned, we had anticipated these things, right? It was all a part of the plan. Okay, planning is defined as the activity by which managers analyze present condition to determine ways of reaching a desired future state. It embodies the skills of anticipation, influencing and controlling the nature and direction of change. Okay, it is basically trying to determine the future basis the present state and the facts and estimates that you have. Now it calls for anticipation. Anticipation skills is forecasting, right? Certain element of influencing, right? I have to influence my team, I have to influence my stakeholders to execute the plan, and also controlling the nature and direction of change. I think the key word is try and controlling the nature and direction of change, right? Because change may not always be in your hand, and I think may or may not be possible to direct and control change all the time. Yeah. So planning is the function that determines in advance what should be done. It consists of selecting the enterprise objectives, policies, procedures, and other means of achieving the objectives. Now, I think this is very relevant to, I'm sure all of us or most of us do in our day-to-day lives. It is basically, you talk about a quarterly plan, a quarterly business plan. I think we are at the end of almost the end of the year, and most of us, who have worked, will start planning for the next fiscal or the next financial year, right? So it could be a budgetary exercise, it could be a hiring plan. I think this makes more sense because it also depends on the objectives. You can't have 10 objectives. What's your objective? And again, you'll have departmental objectives, which is basically in line to the overarching objective of the organization, right? So it could be that it's closely tied to your vision and mission, right? So vision is basically where you want to be. Okay, mission is what you want to do. So let's say if I want to say my vision is I want to be my company should be the most valuable stock. Now my mission is, that's the vision. Mission is, what do I do to do that, right? So basically a set of objectives, policies, programs. We all have policies, procedures we may or may not like, but then every organization has a policy, be it recruitment, be it pertaining to performance. Okay, so a set of these policies, procedures need to fall in line as a part of the plan. In planning, the manager must be able to manipulate abstract ideas and anticipate the impact of the many possible outcomes as they affect the enterprise as a whole. Okay, abstract is something which is not seen, right? Now again, this is I don't know how true is this or how feasible is it for the manager to forecast or to manipulate. I can forecast to a certain extent, and this is where I want the real experience to kick in and your reflection to make sense of the definition, right? So basically, see, again, let's say attrition. Okay, you can forecast attrition, you can curb attrition to a certain extent, but can you manipulate the attrition and get it down to zero? The answer is a no, right? Again, abstract ideas, manipulation of abstract ideas is feasible to a certain extent, but that's what planning in this context means, and I may or may not be true to your industry or your present day to day. Okay, features of planning. Planning is a primary function of management. Okay, when planning, the manager decides which of the alternatives should be followed which policies, procedures and projects and so on. Okay, so basically, let's say we decide the next fiscal. Okay, some companies follow Jan to December, some companies follow April to March. Now let's say we want to increase our revenue by 10%. Okay, that's the primary goal. Now your planning is going to start to increase the revenue by 10%. Now for that, you'll have to focus on your businesses, which lines of businesses you should focus on, which you should not focus on. You'll also look at the alignment of your people, your staffing, who are your key resources, what are the possible distractions that you need to take care of, certain policies or objectives that need to be in place. For instance, if you need to get top talent, you need to spend money, right? So you need to have a budget for that. So that's again a part of the policy. How do you manage your budgets? How do you manage your cash flow? So on and so forth. Planning is goal oriented, so self-explanatory. You plan to attain a goal, right? So if you have a goal, you have a plan. I mean, again, going back to the classical saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So it's goal oriented, defines the organizational goals and the appropriate actions to attain those goals. Goals might be different for different organizations in different sectors, right? Planning is an intellectual process. In the words of Theo Hyman, planning requires a mental predisposition to think before acting, to act in the light of facts rather than of guesses, and generally speaking, to do things in an orderly way. Okay, so the key word here is action. You need to act, but you need to think before you act, right? And it needs to be, your actions need to be substantiated by data, right? So planning is pervasive. When I say pervasive, planning is universal for an organization. It touches all departments of an organization, all levels and all departments. So you cannot have a standalone policy for a particular department or a standalone procedure for a particular department, right? Now let's say if there is something to do with performance, that performance policy has to be universal for all departments, correct? And every department has to fall in line as per the plan to attain objectives, right? So be it your HR, be it your finance, be it your marketing, be it your operations, all your departments are touched by the plan. Planning is a continuous action, continuous function to keep the organization as a going concern. It is essential that planning must be done continuously. So your planning never stops. I mean, why do you look at your own personal lives or look at sports for that matter? Plans in a football game change very dynamically, right? So because it is totally contextual, it depends on the situation, and even in your organizations and your respective departments, you keep planning and you keep adapting to the plan. As and when situations arise, you have to have adaptability factored in your plan. Okay. Planning involves choice between alternatives. Planning involves choice among alternatives, courses of action. If there's only one course, objective, policy, program or procedure, perhaps then there exists no need for planning. Absolutely. So how many times in your day-to-day life you have heard, what's the plan B, or what is the contingency plan? What is the plan C if plan A and plan B fail, right? So the very fundamental of planning is that you have to choose between alternatives, right? Now if there's only one way, it's a rare scenario, right? Now one scenario I could recall is way back, and that company is no longer existent today as we speak. It is, but it is no longer existent in the cell phone market, right? So there was a time when Nokia used to have monopoly on the phones, right? Cell phones. So I mean, that's one rare scenario, but then apart from that, you need to have alternatives to choose. Otherwise there's no need to plan. If everything is in place and the only option that you have is working for you, then there's no need to plan. Planning is concerned with the accomplishment of group objectives. Very, very important. Planning is thus aimed at setting group goals and organizational goals rather than concentrating on individual goals. So it is basically your, it could either be the funnel down or the funnel up, right? So it is basically done. See, the very essence of management is meeting objectives, right? So it is basically to meet certain objectives, could be anything, right? Now could be to increase market share by 10%, could be to increase sales by 10%, right? But it has to be for every department, and it has to be for the organization, right? Now if you look at today's news, Maruti's sales in the lower segment has dropped, but their sales in the mid segment cars have picked up, right? So I'm sure they had a plan to attain sales for all segments of the cars, but now while the overall numbers have been met rather, you know, the numbers for that particular segment, the smaller segment of the cars, has not been met. So I'm sure there is a plan B or an adaptability factored in that plan, right? As we speak. Okay, planning is flexible. Okay, now again, this is self-explanatory. Planning is flexible because you cannot have a very rigid plan, correct? Now obviously you need to be flexible as per, now who forecasted, let's look at supply chain. Who forecasted like 3 months back, you know, no one would have forecasted, or 6 months back, no one would have forecasted the Israel-Hamas war, right? Or let's say 4 years back, no one would have forecasted the Russia-Ukraine war, right? Or let's say today, if you see the people are talking about congestion at the Panama Canal, right? That's one of the 2 primary routes for world trade. Suez Canal is the other one, right? So obviously, if there is a scenario, you know, and this is something you will learn in your in this subject, the PEST factor, that is political, economical, social and technological. So your plan needs to be flexible. Yep. Limitations of planning. Now, inaccuracy, this is the root cause for a plan to fail. It is disastrous if you figure out that the data that you're leaning on is wrong and not correct. The source of data is not correct, and you have made an entire plan based on that data, and then midway through the plan you realize that, you know, the data itself was flawed. So inaccuracy, this is a terrible mistake. I mean, inaccuracy based on the wrong data that you have is going to give you a terrible outcome of the plan that you make. Time consuming planning involves determination of the major goals to be achieved. It is time consuming and it involves energy, time and mobilization of different kinds of resources. So, I mean, so many times, any kind of plan, you know, if there's a deadline, the first thing we do is we look at the email and see what's the deadline date. And let's be honest, we all don't even start moving 2 or 3 days before the deadline. In fact, sometimes we're guilty of doing it on the last day, a day prior to the deadline, right? So this is a very time consuming, not necessarily a very exciting activity. It calls for digging into facts, trends, look for data points. So not the most exciting thing which people like to do. It's time consuming, and of course it involves a lot of departments, correct? So mobilization of resources is the key, because you might not have you might have dependence on your finance or on your IT for certain pieces of information that needs to be in place before you plan. Rigidity. Now this is contradictory. Planning often gives some amount of rigidity to its policies, procedures, programs and methods. A balance between stability and flexibility in planning is to be maintained. Very, very important, because you know, 4 minutes back we said planning needs to be flexible. Now we're saying that the limitation is that it's rigid. You know, sometimes you have to adhere to a certain policy, you have to adhere to a certain procedure. In certain programs you have to follow norms, because it could be a government mandate, right? It could be something which is to do with a pertinent law which has just come up. So the essence of planning is to, where it should be rigid, it should be rigid, right? There are certain areas where you need to follow certain procedures and policies, correct? But then the balance, the sweet spot is to strike a balance between flexibility and rigidity. Attitudes of management. Costly planning is a costly exercise because it requires money, time, and information. So it's self-explanatory. A lot of resources, a lot of manpower involved, a lot of time involved. Time is money essentially, right? Attitudes of management. Good planning is an agonizing process. It is an intellectual activity. It requires tremendous amount of paperwork and time. Most managers would not like to undergo such a painful process and prefer to become doers rather than thinkers. Okay. Excuse me. So it's a very agonizing, it's a painful process. Like I said some time back, it's not a very glamorous exercise that people like to do. It is paperwork may not be relevant in today's age. You don't use too much of paper, but then yes, you use a lot of Excel sheets and PPTs, and you wait for the last slide when you are part of such a planning exercise. You're just attentive for the first 3-4 slides, and then you wait for the last slide, right? So it calls for a lot of time, energy, and effort, right? So, and that's the reason, most of the people, they like to execute. They just rely on their seniors to formulate the plan, and then they're happy to do the execution part of it. Faulty design of planning system. Some of the limitations due to the design of planning system. Lack of reward. Planning system may not have reward mechanism, and as such managers tend to address their attention to short run results of their own performance which carry reward. So a very classical scenario, if you would have heard this. So lack of reward across departments and levels if organizational goals are met. Okay, now you would see that a lot of times executives say that one of their primary challenges is to align their objectives to departmental and individual objectives. Now what it says here is, I would rather as a manager, and it's very common, focus on my individual goals and my departmental goals, losing sight of the overall organizational goals, right, if there's no reward. Lack of participation. Again, very common these days. If you say that and you involve people across levels, you have these discussions, it is important that you have a buy-in of your stakeholders, and your stakeholders are not only your seniors or your executives. Your stakeholders are also your managers, your team, your frontline guys who are a part of your department. Okay, so if it is an imposed plan, anyways, it's not going to get implemented, right? Because there's no buy-in. Because ultimately, most of the times, your inputs idly and to be practical should come from the ground. Because if most of these executives, they have a 30,000 view of the actual ground, and if something comes on paper which is not very practical, the plan is not going to be executed. Lack of specific activities. Planning cannot be okay. So again a lot of jargons are used. Okay, you need to break down the goals. Now if I say that my organizational goal is to increase sales by 10% in 2 years, I need to break that down. Otherwise it becomes a very vague and ambiguous statement. The guy at the ground may not necessarily relate to what the objective or the goal is, right? So again, you would have heard goals need to be specific and clear. It's a very common jargon is SMART goals, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, right? So quantification of the goals is extremely important. In fact, some of the leadership programs where I've been a part of, we have made people to write down goals, to specific goals, right? So that it makes sense to them, whether they fit into the criteria of SMART, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. And I would really urge each one of you to try this exercise. Write down a goal, write down a SMART goal, and see if it meets all the parameters of your SMART acronym, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Okay, competence of the planner. A planner must possess not only skill but intelligence and breadth of vision, and for long range master planning must have the ability to forecast. So again, you need to be a seasoned campaigner. Something here, I think skill and intelligence, people do have the skill and intelligence, but the key word is the breadth of the vision, right? So what's your horizon? Is it a short-term plan? Is it a long-term plan? What is that you're exactly trying to achieve? The breadth of the vision is extremely important, and ability to forecast, right? So again, this gets a little tricky and subjective, because you might not be able to forecast everything under the sun, but something related to your trade, something related to your dynamics, business dynamics, okay, over the past few years you would have seen certain ups and downs. So you should be able to derive some trends out of those incidents or events over the last 3 years or 4 years. And that's why I think they are talking about skill, competencies, and a little bit of anticipatory skills. Okay, planning prevents innovation. Planning demands total commitment to return policies, procedures, rules, etc. It restricts a manager unnecessarily to define areas. Now, again, it is subjective. I might not completely agree with this, because even if you follow policies and procedures, it is nothing that you can't innovate, right? But here I feel that the reference is to a very, very typical classical structural organization where you're very rigid on the procedures, policies, and you need to adhere to those procedures and policies, where there is no flexibility in the plan. And that's why it stifles innovation. Okay, lack of orientation and training for managers, very, very common. So there are two things, right? One is your team's buy-in or your manager's buy-in. They need to be on board for the plan. Now, I'm sure there are many times in your professional life or in your day-to-day, you would have seen that a plan does not fall in place because the managers just don't get it what is to be done. And the first instance is, it could be a will issue, or it could be lack of participation. But then you dig deep and you realize that the team was never oriented. They never knew what is to be done precisely, or they never had that skill. They were never trained on that skill, right? A classical example is, let's say, an operations team taking interviews. That's not the operations team's forte. That is something that has to be dealt with by the HR or the talent acquisition team. Now, if you take something, you're not oriented, you're not even given a brief. Obviously, you will see certain things from an operations standpoint, but there are other two factors, way too many factors that need to be looked into if you interview a candidate, right? So that orientation, that training has to be provided to the managers. Uncertainty, planning has to reckon with numerous uncertainties in the environment. Okay, so this is again, it's a limitations of a plan. But then today you would study, people are talking about VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So I think uncertainty is something which is a given in today's environment. So I think it makes sense if you focus more on the controllable aspects of the plan. But yes, uncertainty is a factor that a plan has to take care of. Finally, planning is a mere ritual in a fast-changing environment. The sudden and dramatic changes in technology, competition, government regulations, political, legal, ethical, and social changes reduce the effectiveness of the planning effort. Exactly. So your PESTEL, which is your political, economical, social, technological, environmental, and legal. Now, these factors can absolutely change your plan or make your plan redundant, right? So you plan at the start of the year, but then any change can make your plan ineffective. Okay, so let's say, for example, now let's take a very real-time example. Right now, if you are talking about competition, okay, let me I don't know how many of you are updated with the news. Now, government is promoting electric vehicles. Production linked incentives is something which the government is promoting, and you'll see a lot of Indian players, including Ather, Bajaj, Ola, getting into the manufacturing of electric vehicles. In fact, Ola has set up a huge factory in Chennai to produce electric scooters. Now the government was providing all sorts of support, incentive, subsidies to these players to push the agenda of electric vehicles, right? But now, of late, you see that there have been talks of the Commerce Minister and the Home Minister hosting Elon Musk and inviting him to India to manufacture Tesla cars. Now, this is something which is a complete change in government policy, or a complete shift, okay, which obviously would not have been anticipated in the plan. Okay, so that's one practical example. Prerequisites of planning does not substitute facts for judgment. It does not substitute science for the manager. Okay, however, some general principle can be followed to make planning effective. Okay, so judgment and facts go hand in hand. The manager is a key resource or a key factor when it comes to planning. Now, when I say manager, I'm talking about a departmental or a functional head or an executive. So in this context, it's manager. Okay, make plan simple and easy to understand. When the plan itself is complicated, it invites its understandings among the members of the organization. Now, very simple, explanatory, self-explanatory. Now, be it your corporate life, be it your personal life, plan needs to be simple, and it needs to be it should be easily understood by people, right? Now, otherwise you would have heard the word Chinese whisper, right? Each one has his or own version of the plan, and it's easy to misinterpret the plan, or misinterpret the objective that needs to be attained, or misinterpret the outcome that needs to be attained, right? And so many times, just relate to your day-to-day and in your workplace, people saying in Hindi, "Arey, mujhe to laga aisa karna tha," right? So that's nothing but that's basically a communication breakdown. Okay. Be selective in the plan. Successful managers never try to cover too much territory. Okay. Now, absolutely, you need to be specific, and a golden rule is try to attain one or two things at a time, right? Ideally, you attain one thing at a time. So you cannot have 4 plans for the quarter, right? You cannot say, I'll increase my revenue by 10%, I'll increase my margins by 5%, I'll increase my market share by 10%, and I'll reduce my attrition by 20%. That's not viable, that's not practical. So you need to focus on your priorities, and you need to be very specific, especially when it comes, because the key is implementation, right? Plan should be geared to meet the needs of those who implemented it. Absolutely. So it should, a very common terminology used is a win-win plan, right? So it should be something which should, you saw earlier that people involve levels for the plan, right? So it should be for those who implement it. What's in for me is a very commonly used terminology. Why should I do this? Okay. So plan should be very clearly articulated, and it should have something for those who execute the plan, who's going to do it at the ground. It's extremely important. A plan should be thorough. It should not omit any function or sub-function, and should not overlook any necessary details. At the same time, controversial statements should be avoided or ignored. Okay. So again, the devil lies in the details. I mean, it is not. I fail to understand how would you miss a certain department or a specific function, but a plan has to be thorough and complete. It has to encompass all the functions. It has to involve all the stakeholders. It has to got the buy-in of all departments, right? I do not get the point or understand the context of controversial statement should be avoided or ignored in the context of a plan. So I'm not too sure why this is being put here, but maybe you should not make outlandish statements in a plan, right? So for instance, instead of saying that we would be the number 1 in the market, you say that we'll beat these guys, we'll ensure that we throw these guys out of competition and make them number 2, and we'll be number 1. Something on those lines is what my sense is. Okay, according to Gary Dessler, to plan effectively, the manager should consider the following points. Develop accurate forecasts. Okay, forecasting can be made accurate by educating the forecasting users in the art of relating the forecasting techniques to practical problems, and also encouraging the people who are entrusted with the forecasting job to look into the informational needs of managers. Okay, so basically try and get the forecast as accurate as possible is what this says, and to get as much data as possible, as much information as possible, as accurate as possible. That's in simple words. If you don't want to complicate this, gain acceptance for the plan. Very very important, self-explanatory, but again it's extremely important, because it should not. So many times people walk out of the boardroom or a meeting room with complete non-acceptance to what was discussed inside in their mind, and that's a failure at the first point itself. And that's why it's extremely important that the buy-in or acceptance of the plan is across levels so that you can execute the plan. Plan must be a sound one. To increase efficiency of plans, managers are advised to follow an open system approach where they recognize and pay concentration to the complex environment in which their organization is functioning, apart from judging the pros and cons of a plan. So plan must not only be a thorough one, a complete one. Most often than not, people try and avoid the trouble areas. People only want to discuss the good stuff, the hunky-dory stuff, things which are good, which will look good. But then obviously there has to be a devil. There has to be a devil's advocate. There has to be a devil in the room. You need to take the bull by the horn. When I say that, you need to focus on the complex areas. You cannot isolate the complex areas. Pros and cons are fine, but then you need to tackle the problem child, you need to tackle the problem children, and you need to ensure that they are also touched upon, right? Develop an effective planning organization. Planning involves answers to several questions. The solution for these questions requires a blueprint for planning and planning organization as such. So essentially they're talking about a core team or a set of individuals who basically come up with a blueprint, or who basically come up with a layout for the plan, right? So you need a set of reliable, skilled, competent individuals who can be trusted upon to come up with a blueprint and then ensure that the comprehensive plan is in place. Be objective. We've heard this multiple times. It should not be subjective, it should not be based, but it's very very difficult to be very objective in a plan, right? Many a times you see that your opinions are very subjective. It's not driven by data. You have very strong perceptions or strong beliefs. You have biases, inherent biases that all of us have, right? It's just sheer human nature. So you should be able to look at data. You should be able to look at the truth. If there is something pessimistic, you need to look into that pessimism. You need to look into that aspect before you formulate a plan. You also need to look into the fact that you're not over optimistic about a certain thing. Measure firm's market value. One of the primary responsibilities of a manager is to measure the total market and see that organization's share in the market is as large as possible. For this, manager should estimate the firm's share in the market. See, as I said, now this is a very very manufacturing or consumer goods driven point. Now I mean, from my experience or from the people I've worked with, we do not try and size up the market or estimate the market share. Correct. Now, even if I know, let's say if I know today, hypothetically, the IT BPM industry in India is $92 billion. What am I going to do with that information? Right? I can set an aspirational goal for myself. See, let's say if my company is doing $5 million annually, I can set up a goal there. But this definition is very, very, this point is too I would say FMCG driven, right? So basically what it says is a manager needs to have some insights into how the market is trending, how the market is shaping, or what are the factors that drive market share, right? For example, let me give you an example. Now, there was, and this was some time back, I don't know how many of you recall it. Maggie had a controversy. Maggie had a controversy where it was banned for some time. Maggie is still the most dominant noodles in India, right? They made a comeback. Now that was a time when if that information was available or people had, I don't know how Top Ramen and the other noodle players, they reacted to the situation. But that was a good time to capitalize on what Maggie was going through. Nestle rather, I should not say Maggie. Nestle is the company which manufactures Maggie, right? So it was an excellent opportunity for the others in the market to react and increase their market share. Decide in advance the criteria for abandoning a project. Okay, a plan should always include a specification agreed on in advance for abandoning the plan. Managers should least hesitating in disconnecting the unproductive connections in the product project structure. Now there are two things here. Now one is, these are at the extreme ends of the spectrum, so you need to be very clear. Factors should be laid down when you will abandon a project. If it's not giving you the return, it's not giving you the outcome, it's not giving you the market share, because sometimes people take it very personally. They hold on to that project because there's a lot of personal emotion and energy involved, and that's where you lose your rational. That's one set of individuals. The other set of individuals is, who are driven by mediocrity. So it should not that, it's just that certain things are not working, I'll abandon the project. When things are good, I'll continue, but if things are not good, I'll just leave it. Okay, so that should not be the case. You should have a clear-cut understanding of which projects you will drive and which projects can be abandoned under what factors. Now these days in IT and IT services companies, a lot of people are talking about automation, a lot of people are talking about digitization. Everyone wants to automate, everyone wants to use a chatbot, but which are the factors, which are the projects which you will prioritize, which are the projects that are going to give you return for your investment? Because at the end of the day, the very essence of those investments is attainment of objectives. Yeah. Revise the long-term plans every year. Set up a monitoring system. Set up a monitoring system is self-explanatory. There should be a review mechanism. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard weekly reviews, fortnightly reviews, monthly business reviews with the clients. So if you don't review the plan, there is no plan, right? So you will have to make adjustments to the plan based on your review. So there has to be a review to the plan. Management should review long-term plans annually so as to match external opportunities with an organizational resources in a proper way. By reviewing the progress made on the plan, the reasons for underperformance or overperformance can be found out. Right? So let's say your plan has to be reviewed externally, right? Now let's go back to the Maggie example. If the plan was flexible, if you see an opportunity, you should be able to capitalize on that opportunity. Sometime back I gave you the Maruti sales example. Now let's say if the sales for Vitara and the sales for Ertiga, they have outperformed than what was there in the plan. Does it make sense to look at investing more in those portfolios? Does it make sense to increase the marketing spend for those lines of business? So these sort of examples have to be looked at by senior strategic stakeholders, right? From a strategy standpoint. So you'll have to look at your plan, review your plans, and see how you adapt yourself to the external environment, how you adapt yourself to pestle, right? That's very important. Fit the plan to the situation. These days planning has become situational. A change in any part of the environment must be sensed, and appropriate strategy must be determined to cope up with the change. So again, uncertainty, I would use the word VUCA, which is VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, right? Israel-Hamas war, Russia-Ukraine war, okay, all these are uncertain factors which could not have been predicted, okay? So situational leadership is a word which has come out of this, right? A lot of times you will see in job description these days, people talk about situational leadership. That is nothing but adapting your leadership or adapting yourself to the changing environment and to the changing scenarios. All right, we move ahead, steps in the planning process. Right now, again, we're going as per the textbook, but I want you guys to go back and relate to your own day-to-day jobs, relate to your aspiring jobs which you want to do in the future, relate to your day-to-day activities, and then come up and read these lines or these pointers. Okay, the process of planning consists of a series of interrelated steps which varies depending on the size and complexity of the organization. Absolutely. So planning for a Reliance Petrochemical and planning for, let's say, Swiggy, which is a e-commerce organization, is completely different, right? The size and complexity are poles apart. Okay, so it depends on the size, on the turnover, on the objectives. Now, increasing sales for Reliance by 10% is a huge deal. It's a big deal compared to, let's say, a startup which wants to increase sales by 10%. Okay. Analysis of opportunities. Planning starts with analysis of opportunities in the external environment as well as return with the organization. Goals can only be set when proper scanning of the environment that reveals the opportunities that exist. So basically, there has to be a plan, there has to be a goal, there has to be some objectives. That's why you're planning, right? So what are the opportunities in the organization itself? Let's say if I want to increase my margin by 10% and I know I'm sitting on excess cost, so that's inside the organization. I can reduce that cost, right? So what are the factors? Where do I reduce the cost? How can I reduce the cost, right? There were certain projects which were going on in the organization, let's say 3 quarters back, because there was a change in the external environment. The client suddenly didn't want to spend on certain projects, but suddenly the client wants to increase his investment in these projects. So that's an opportunity. So you need to bring back those projects back from your cold storage. You know, very commonly used word these days is organization discretionary spend, right? So organizations have cut down on their discretionary spend, keeping in mind the turbulent global macro environment. Now, this is a very jargon-based line that I use, but I'm just trying to give you an example. Establishing objectives. The next step in planning process involves establishing objectives for the whole of organization and for the different departments. Organizational objectives provide direction to the major plans. Okay. Essence of management. Objectives. What are those objectives? It is for the organization. That's the overarching objective. That's the top line. You know, that is what all of us are working for. And then there are those specific departmental objectives which are extremely important to attain that overarching objective, right? And every department in its own way will contribute to that objective. So it needs to have specific objectives, specific departmental objectives, right? Okay. Determining planning premises. Planning premises refer to the environment in which the plans are to be implemented. The task of determining premises should only be continued to those aspects that are critical to the plan. So a context, a premise, the basic premise, okay, is the basic environment or the context in which the plan is made, right? So there are certain factors, there are contexts in which a plan needs to be evaluated, a plan needs to be made, okay? And it's very important, it's sometimes very easy to lose track of the core, and that's where what they're trying to say is restrict that to the core activity, restrict that to factors which are very critical, focus on factors which are critical, which are core to your business, right? Identifying alternatives. Different feasible alternatives need to be identified in order to achieve a particular objective, since there may be multifarious ways in which a particular goal can be accomplished. Absolutely. So will you push a substandard product in the market, right? So for instance, some companies don't compromise on the quality of their product, right? You're not going to get Apple phones tomorrow starting 20,000 rupees. Okay, so what is your mode? So like vision is, I want to do this, I want to be there, right? Now mission is, what will I do to be there? Okay, so your alternatives, there might be 10 ways. Which alternative is going to be your alternative? Keeping all the factors in mind, right? Keeping all the stakeholders in mind. That's a very, very critical aspect. So let's say if my plan A fails, what is going to be my plan B? What is going to be my plan C? Right? So what are my plans A, B and C among the alternatives that I have? Right? That's extremely critical. Again, selection of the best alternative, it's self-explanatory. You need to select the best alternative or the best plan to attain your goal. Implementing the plan. Okay, so you know, from practical experience, all the other aspects that we learned, you know, are only textual or are the theory part of it. Okay, something which is looks very rosy, something which looks great sometimes on paper. Nowadays no paper, but looks brilliant on Excel sheets, looks brilliant on your PPTs. But then the core is the implementation of the plan. So many times you'll see the implementation not happening, right? And that's where all your plans go for a toss. Okay, and this is applicable to your corporate life, to sports, the recent World Cup, Cricket World Cup. You saw so many captains talking about execution of the plan, right? Reviewing the plan, another important milestone. People need to review the plan aggressively. It could get very boring. These reviews are sometimes very boring, very monotonous, looking at the same set of data, looking at the same numbers day in, day out. But then that's absolutely critical, because you need to see if the needle is moving as per the plan, and if it is not, then the course correction is extremely important, and for that the timing is very important. Okay, if you're making a quarterly plan and 2 months down the line if you realize that something is not working, it's too late for you to make that course correction. Okay, approaches to planning. A system of independent of the above philosophies of planning, we may identify 4 different approaches to planning in actual practice in various organizations. These approaches are described as follows. Now, this is just a textual, and I'm sure you have heard of these approaches and you have experienced these approaches, right? So it's a top-down approach. Top-down approach means, I mean, if I want to use, you know, common Hindi, you know, sometimes you ask people, yeah, ये तो क्यों कर रहा है? मैं कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि मुझे बोला गया है. Okay, so a top-down approach is basically your top management, they take the initiative or they take the responsibility of formulating a plan, formulating a strategy, formulating objectives, procedures, policies, and then that's driven down levels. Now that needs to be executed. You're given a plan and you need to get executed, right? So again, we'll come back to the advantages or disadvantages later, but for now, for definition sake, that's what top-down approach is. Bottom-up approach. Okay, this is a virtual reversal of the above approach in the sense that the plan proposals originate at the supervisory management level, travel up the management hierarchy in a step-by-step manner, and reach the top management level for review and approval. In this approach, top management generally refrains from giving any guidelines to lower management levels on what to plan and how. Okay, so everything comes from you know, the ground, basically your frontline guys, your supervisors. Okay, and it is then pushed up saying that an innovation could result from this plan, or we could save X amount of money if we do this. We can basically increase sales if we add this feature in the car. So I'm just giving you examples. Now typically this is an ideal situation. You know, people, whenever a discovery is made, let's say whenever something, you know, superficial is achieved by an organization, you'll hear the senior leaders saying that this is our culture, you know, we promote a lot of ideas, we promote a lot of innovation, all our ideas come ground up, those sort of things, right? So again, it totally boils down to the complexity of the organization, right? Whether you have the flexibility, you have the autonomy, you have the independence to drive this sort of an approach, and it depends completely organization to organization. Composite approach, here the top management provides broad parameters and guidelines to line executives at middle and lower management levels, allows the needed flexibility and support to formulate tentative plans which are reviewed and finalized by top management in consultation with all the managers at the appropriate levels. The approach is useful to evolve corporate-wide plans also, which partly draw inspiration from the planning ideas and perspectives generated at the lower level. So basically, you're given some guidelines by the top management. Okay, I need to do this. These are the factors within which you need to do this. Okay, you can do this. You can basically spend X dollars on marketing. Okay, you can hire some managers from outside. I'm just giving you some practical examples. Okay, and basically you're just given a broad guidelines by the top management, and then it's implemented by the team which is on the ground, the team which is going to implement the plan, which is going to execute the plan rather. Team approach. In this approach, the task of planning is entrusted to a select team of managers, whether they are line managers or staff experts. The team functions under the leadership of the chief executive. It does not finalize plans as such, but initiates the planning process, identifies the areas of problems and opportunities, examines the internal and external environment, and collects information, solicits ideas, and formulates tentative proposal for consideration by the chief executive. The team is used by the latter as its brains trust. It may even ask to monitor the progress of plans and review performance. Chief Strategy Officer, a very commonly used designation these days, right? Or the chairman's team, office of the chairman, office of the chief executive. Okay, so this is a specialized team. Now this is something where the planning at an organization level could be at an organizational level, could be at a departmental level, or it could be at an organizational level and then trickle down departmental levels, right? So, but the gist here is it is entrusted to a select team, to a team which basically outlines the plan, does not print or does not execute the plan, but just outlines the contours of the plan and shares it with the chief executive. Okay, to provide guidance to managers to make decisions, take action and solve problems, various plans are drawn. These plans help the managers in managing day-to-day affairs, utilizing resources of organization efficiently, and in regulating working behavior of subordinates. Okay, these plans do provide unifying and consistent base for managerial decision and action. These may be grouped into use of single-use plans and standing plans. Okay, so plan is basically a structure which is followed to manage day-to-day operations. There has to, you would have heard the terminology SOP, statement of purpose, right? So there are standard SOPs, standard guidelines across processes, across procedures in organizations. Now it is a plan is a guideline which needs to be followed to for your day-to-day affairs, to ensure that your resources are utilized as per the plan, right? Now it's also sort of a governing, it's also for governing subordinate behavior, right? So for instance, let's say certain behaviors are not tolerated, or certain behaviors are not encouraged, because it will not, as per the plan, if you behave in that particular fashion, your objectives will not be met, right? Now a standing plan is basically a recurring plan, is a ritual which you do day in, day out, right? A standing plan is done every year. It's a recurring activity, it's a monotonous activity. There is a quarterly plan, there is a half-yearly plan, there's a yearly plan, right? So basically, it is something which is standard, which is routine, which is part and parcel of the organization. That's a standing plan in simple words. Single-use plan is used once and then discarded. So it could be a particular season, right? It could be a flash launch. It could be, let's say, capitalization of an opportunity, right? But it is a plan which is very specific to a situation. Okay, that is what a single use plan is. Okay, very important one. Planning premises. Planning premises are basic assumptions about the environment in which plans are expected to be implemented. Certainly, planning has to take into account numerous uncertainties in its environment. Premises guide effectively planning. As pointed out by Harold Kuntz, planning premises spell out stage of expected future event which is believed will exist when plans operate. They are the expected environment of plans. Planning premises are largely derived from forecasting. The effectiveness of planning to a great extent depends on how accurately the premises are developed from out of the forecasting data. Though it is not possible to predict accurately future environmental conditions, planning is necessarily to be based on certain assumptions about the environment. These assumptions are captured in the form of planning premises. Okay. So basically, the factors or your forecasts have to be driven by data, have to be driven by environmental conditions or certain conditions which are going to be a part and parcel, okay, which are going to be prevalent, and then accordingly it's the most important factor. Now let's say if we say that excise duty on certain products is going to be there for the next 2 years, right? For instance, if you're dealing with let's say government bodies, or if you're dealing with government businesses, that's one of your verticals, then obviously there has to be a delay in decision making because of the levels involved. So that's going to be a part of your planning. That's a premise that you can't avoid, right? Let's say one more example that comes to my mind is, for instance, we say that the cost of fuel is going to be high for some time because of various factors. The price of oil per barrel is going to impact your petrol and diesel prices, right? So if you want to, so that's going to be a constant, that's going to be a maintenance, that's going to be a cost, for your car. Your fuel cost is going to be a constant to a certain level. So that's another, that's going to hit the purse of the consumer, right? So the premise is basically the environmental factors which will be prevalent, and from our experience, from our historic data, we need to consider those premises. And probably, the icing on the cake or the cherry on the cake would be anticipation of additional premises, right? Maybe you could anticipate a labor strike. Maybe you could say that labor unions will become an issue in the coming days in this particular state or in this particular factory. Planning premises can be, and this is where I was talking about your PESTEL or PEST. PESTEL is basically a very important component, political, economical, social, technological, environmental and legal, right? So internal and external premises, controllable, semi-controllable and uncontrollable premises, tangible and intangible premises. The factors which exist within the business organization furnish the basis for internal premises. These include sales forecast, cash flows, capital budgeting, advertising expenditure, product line, marketing mix, competence of the managerial personnel, etc. On the other hand, external premises are concerned with general business climate comprising of economical, social, political, technological conditions in the economy. Okay, so internal is basically within your organization, the factors that are in your control, basically your product mix, your launches, your people, your budget, those sort of things which you're aware of and which you can control, right? External premises, political changes, social changes, okay, those things like I said, social, political, technological, economical, right? What is missing here is environmental and legal. Controllable and semi-controllable and uncontrollable premises. The premises which can be controlled by the management are known as controllable premises. These include the internal policies, credit policies, investment plans, research projects, etc., which are within the jurisdiction of the management. Semi-controlled premises are those over which the management has some control. Some of the examples of these premises are union, management relations, firm share in the market strategies, labor turnover, etc. Finally, premises over which a control firm has no control include natural calamities, wars, strikes, innovations, emergency legislation, etc. So again, completely in your control, partly in your control, your actions will control. Okay, your actions may or may not lead to the market share that you want, but definitely you have to take the actions. So that is semi-controllable. The actions that I take may or may not give me the market share. Okay, may not give me the market share that I aspire for. Okay, my attrition is semi-controllable again. I can predict attrition. I can take measures to curb attrition. Okay, my employee morale, again, my employee engagement, that's semi-controllable. I can take steps, but I don't completely control that, right? Again, uncontrollable is self-explanatory, like a war, Russia-Ukraine war. I don't know if you guys were updated. There was a ship which was stuck in the Suez Canal for some days that blocked the movement of ships to and fro across the channel, the Suez Canal. So that is something no one could have anticipated. So that's completely uncontrollable. Tangible is something you can see. Intangible is something you can't see. The premises that can be expressed in tangible physical terms, such as labor, hours, production units, are known as tangible premises. On the other hand, intangible premises are those that defy quantification. Example of intangible premises are public relations, employee morale, reputation of the firm, competitive strength of the firm. Though the intangible premises cannot be quantified in specific terms, these cannot be ignored while planning. Absolutely. Right? So in a way, your employee morale is an input. It's a variable which is very critical. So your tangible premise are anything that you can measure, you can see. Okay, these intangibles, employee morale, for example, you can say the employee morale is high, you can say the employee morale is low. You cannot say employee morale is 100, or you cannot say employee morale is 20. Okay, but reputation of the firm. The firm is a reputed firm, but reputation is relative. Okay, now one firm can be more reputed than the others, right? Now X is a reputed firm, Tata is a reputed firm, but both have their different credibilities. Now the intangibles are, I would say the intangibles are extremely critical, especially your reputation, your core competency, your competitive strength. They're extremely important premises of a plan. All right, we move on. I would appreciate if you guys can go through the notes and I would check on how we can exchange views or opinions on planning. We're done with planning part of it. We move to organizing, right? Before we move to organizing, the best organizer in this world is your mom. That will give you a gist of, we all know what organizing is, but that will give you a gist of what an excellent organizer is, right? It's basically how you deal with your, how you manage your resources, how you allocate your resources, how you deal with your resources, how you allocate your budget, those sort of things, how you divide work, those sort of things. An important function of management, organizing, is defined as the dividing and subdividing of duties and responsibilities which are necessary to any purpose and arranging them in groups which are assigned to individual. Again, dividing of work and responsibilities. That's why you have departments, you have teams, right? You have a ratio, you have a support ratio, you have a span. So basically you're dividing of activities into groups and teams. In the words of Coons and O'Donnell, organizing involves the establishment of an internal structure of roles through determination and enumeration of activities required to achieve the goals of an enterprise and each part of it. The grouping of these activities, the assignment of such groups of activities to manager, the delegation of authority to carry them out, and provision for coordination of authority and informational relationships horizontally and vertically in the organization structure. I would say follow a simpler definition if it gives you if you have the liberty to do that, because again, in simple words, what Coons and O'Donnell are trying to say is assigning activities or allocating activities. First of all, identifying the activities. Let's say if I am a departmental head, I will categorize my activities into the number and the classification of activities, and then I would attribute a complexity level to that activity, right? Everyone can't do every activity. So it's a simple activity, it's a medium complex activity, or it's a complex activity. Then I would ascertain the output that is required and the effort that goes into the activity. And accordingly, I will have teams or groups of individuals assigned to that activity, right? With the complete support, independence given, or even delegation. If managers, certain activities are delegated to managers to take certain calls in certain situations, right? George Terry defines organizing as establishing the effective authority relationship among selected works, persons and workplaces in order for the group to work together effectively. Thus, organizing function consists of dividing work, groups and individuals, and providing for the required coordination. Okay, so he's also added the authority part to the division of work, right? So you need to have appropriate authorities across levels, so you need, one is the division and subdivision of work, and then you need to have the authority to control that set of activities or to ensure that those activities get done as per the plan, right? And also providing support, resources and other support for those activities to get executed. In the words of Lewis Allen, organizing is the process of identifying and grouping the work to be performed, defining and delegating responsibility and authority, and establishing relationships for the purpose of enabling the people to work most effectively together in accomplishing objectives. In a sense, organizing is the managerial function that deals with the allotment of duties, coordination of tasks, delegation of authority, sharing of responsibility, etc. Okay, so one is the crux of all these definitions. Is first is identifying the activities, dividing the work as per the activities, coordination among departments, extremely important. It's not that you can operate in silos. It's an end-to-end, like in a factory, in a supply chain, in services also. Departments have to come together, because one department's input can be the output, can be the input for the other department. So the coordination for those activities, collective responsibility and authority, all these tasks or all these clubbed together form the essence of organizing. Orientation involves the introduction of, now a lot of these things, or a lot of topics that are coming up are things that you've heard of in your organizations, in your current work role. Orientation is basically, you have an orientation day when an employee joins new, right? So you need not, unless there are specific terminologies which need to be used, you need not by heart the text. Just use your experience and use your day-to-day engagement that you have to relate to these terms. Okay, so basically involves the introduction of new employees to the enterprise, its functional tasks and people. Large firms usually conduct a formal orientation program, which are conducted usually by the HR department. Orientation acts as a function of organizational socialization, serving three main purposes. So orientation is basically to induct an employee into the organization. Acquisition of work skills and abilities. So I need to know, what is when I am inducting an employee, it's a two-way thing, right? I am acquiring the employee and his skills and abilities into the organization. At the same time, as an employee, I need to know what skills are relevant, or what are the skills that will enable me to be successful in my role. Adoption of appropriate rule behavior, very important, and you'll see HR focusing a lot on this, the do's and don'ts, in the first maybe 30 days, for 60 days, go through a whole range of documents, go through policies, including phishing policies, IT security policies, respect at work, prevention of sexual harassment, okay, signing of various documents. So these policies so the employee knows exactly that what is appropriate behavior. Adjustment to the norms and values of the work group, very important. In short, adjustment to the culture, right? So the do's and don'ts in certain organizations is extremely important, because a new employee is trying to find his or her feet. So it's extremely important, I would say, more than the do's, not to know the not to do's, right? So that the employee is not in trouble. Okay, placement, again, you know what placement is, okay? As determination of the job which an accepted candidate is to be assigned and is assigned to that job. A proper placement is instrumental in reducing employee turnover, absenteeism, and boosting. So again, this is somehow, I feel it's a little outdated, because you cannot have an induction without proper placement, correct? So placement is nothing but allocating the right responsibility as per the right skill set. So, you will not find these days, especially in large organization, someone with a HR background is hired for accountancy, or the other way around, right? So obviously placing, but what is important here is placing the right guy at the right place. I think that becomes more important as and when the employee gets tenured in the organization. Now, for instance, I know a CA is a CA. I know what is his basic qualification or her basic qualification is. I know what sort of skill sets potentially the employee might get in when the employee joins. But what is more important is placement of that resources in due course of time, right? To see if the person is adding value to the role, and accordingly put the best person for the best job. As a function of management, as a process, organizing includes the following steps: identifying the work, grouping the work, establishing formal reporting relationships, providing for measurement, evaluation and control, delegation of authority and responsibility, and coordination. I think we have touched upon this. Okay, all of these are important. Providing for measurement, evaluation and control. You need to know what you measure and how you measure, when you measure, right? That frequency is extremely important. I think other pieces we touched upon, pretty much self-explanatory. Identifying the work. Okay, the first step in the organizing process is to identifying the work to be performed in the enterprise. Every organization is created deliberately to achieve some predetermined objectives. It is absolutely essential to identify the work to be performed to achieve the goal. Okay. All right. So simple. I mean, obviously these departments are created or carved out intentionally, because there has to be a finance department to monitor your finances. There has to be an HR department to take care of employee morale, to take care of employee engagement, to take care of employee turnover, right? So basically the premise here is a department is intentionally created and work is divided. Simple common sense, nothing to do with management, right? A work is divided so that there is no duplication of efforts, there is no overlap of work. A and B should not be doing the same task unless it is more to do with scale. Now let's say A and B can do the same task. In a contact center industry, A is also taking calls, B is also taking calls, because the situation demands that we need 100 people taking calls, looking at the volume or looking at the forecast of the calls that are going to be coming from the customers, right? So you see that there is an exception also. It completely depends on your industry and the context in which you see. So duplication, this is not duplication. This in the contact center industry, this is good news. 100 people doing the same kind of work, basically meaning that the company is getting that much volume, which in turn means that you're driving that revenue. Grouping the work, again, dividing the work is a sense of organizing function. Again, I would urge you guys to read this. Grouping the work is self-explanatory, but again, grouping certain pieces which are important here is the volume of the work which is there, the complexity of the work, the priority of the work. That's definitely, these factors need to be kept in mind when you group the work. Establishing formal reporting relationship. Again, you need to have a formal reporting. All of us have reporting managers or bosses in common terms. We have subordinates, we lead teams, right? So a reporting relationship is extremely important. So there is a formal channel of communication. All the functions of organizing are executed through the realm of a proper reporting structure. Providing for measurement, evaluation and control. Again, whatever gets measured gets done. It's a classical saying. So you need to know what you measure. You need to know when to measure, right? You need to know how many times to measure. You need to know what are you evaluating in performance, right? When I say performance evaluation, it's a very broad term, but what am I evaluating, right? Am I evaluating subjective parameters? Am I evaluating objective parameters, right? And control in some form. Your review is your control, right? So so if let's say if I fail in a particular task, right, this month, do I have a control mechanism in place to avoid the same mistake? You will increasingly see managers using the jargon. What is the control mechanism in place, right? So you can make mistakes, but you cannot keep repeating those mistakes. And that's why I feel that control is important. Delegating authority. I think authority is the right to act and extract obedience from others. A manager may not be able to perform tasks without granting authority to him by the organization. While assigning duties, the manager should clearly specify authority and responsibility limits. So delegation is basically ensuring that you involve your team. You focus on the job which is more important for you as a manager, and you delegate the trivial tasks, not necessarily trivial tasks, but the tasks which do not require that much focus and time, that don't demand so much of your time. In the meanwhile, what you're also doing is, while you're focusing on the core, you're also developing your team, or you're also engaging your team and preparing them for the next level, right? So delegation is very common. I think on a lighter note, I think in our setups most of the tasks get delegated. Coordination is self-explanatory. So coordination entails coordination across levels, across departments, individuals, teams. In simple words, each piece of the jigsaw needs to come together if the plan needs to be executed, and no individual or departments can operate in silos, right? Staffing. Okay. Again, very common in today's corporate world. Staffing is nothing but resources, planning and mobilization of resources, right? How you staff people for a particular window or a particular hour or a particular process or a particular month or a particular quarter. In simple words, process of obtaining and maintaining the capable and competent people to fill all positions from top to operative level, right? You need to have people across board, right people at the right place across levels. In the words of Dalton McFarlane, staffing is the function by which managers build an organization through the recruitment, selection, development of individuals as capable employees. Okay, self-explanatory. You recruit, you staff, you select, you train, you develop, right? According to Coons and O'Donnell, staffing is the executive function which involves recruitment, selection, compensating, training, promotion and retirement of subordinate managers, right? So commonly used jargon these days, hire to retire cycle. That is what Coons and O'Donnell are referring to. You have to, first of all, you have to identify the resource, you have to hire the resource, you have to recruit the resource, you have to train the resource, you have to compensate the resource, you have to motivate the resource, you have to groom the resource, right? And then when the resource retires, you need to have a succession plan in place. Weyrich defines staffing as filling and keeping filled positions in the organization structure. Okay, keeping filled, meaning backfill. Okay, you fill and you backfill the attrition. Certain positions should always be filled, right? So that is what this guy refers to. The staffing is concerned with the placement, growth and development of all those members of the organization whose function is to get things done through the efforts of other individuals. Importance of staffing, actually self-explanatory. Undoubtedly, staffing is a vital function of management, more importantly because it facilitates discovery of competent and qualified people to take up various positions in the organization. Extremely important. So many times you read and you these days, you hear these days, talent is going to be a key differentiator, right? So your talent management has to be comprehensive, well thought of, especially in the services industry. Okay, so that is why it's extremely critical that your talent strategy it's extremely critical because it helps identify current and future resources who are going to be extremely critical for the attainment of those organizational objectives. It enhances productivity by placing right people on the right jobs. Absolutely. It helps in estimating staffing requirements of the organization in future through manpower planning. Right. So that is why you have a talent acquisition team in place, you have a recruitment team in place, which basically anticipates the demand for manpower, which looks at the current forecast, which looks at the future forecast, and accordingly which hires people. It prepares the personnel to occupy the top position within the organization. It helps the development of people through the programs of training and development. Helps people, maybe I am doing something today, I might do some other thing tomorrow, right? So facilitation and of these training programs, training and development is another key factor to retain people. How much exposure does a person get in the organization? What sort of learning does a person has in the organization? Does he have opportunities to take up new challenges, right? So identifying a skill set and training and developing individuals to take on bigger and more roles is basically what this means. It helps the organization to make the best use of existing workforce. It ensures adequate and equitable remuneration of workforce. It results in high employee morale and job satisfaction by placing the right people on right jobs. Very critical aspect. So what keeps you engaged is a very common question which is asked these days, right? Are you engaged? Are you satisfied? Are you fulfilled with what you do? Correct. So employee morale and job satisfaction is directly related to the right placement and the right kind of jobs that we're doing. And not only those jobs, some people are very happy to do the same thing day in, day out. Go back to old public servants, a generation back, they used to do the same thing. They were very happy to do the same thing, 9 to 5, daily tasks, same task, every Monday, every Friday, and retire when they were 58 or 60. But that does not necessarily fit every individual. These days, individuals want more responsibilities, more challenges. They want to be in the thick of action, especially the Gen Z, the millennials. 54% of our country is below 25 years of age. Now, this is not the set of individuals who want to do the same sort of jobs, and they want more challenges, right? So it's extremely important. It makes the top management aware of the requirements of manpower arising from transfer, promotion, turnover, retirement, death, etc. Okay, so basically the staffing planning. Some people in a huge conglomerate, people get transferred across departments, across locations. People leave. It gives you a very good idea of what is the requirement in the coming days. Also, from a top management perspective, what is not elaborated here is gives them a very good idea of the competence and the talents of your workforce. The kind of workforce that you have in terms of dealing with new businesses, new challenges, whether you can venture into a new market, whether you have the skills, whether your talent is a key differentiator. That's very important from a strategic standpoint. Staffing process is concerned with providing the organization with the right number of people at the right place and at the right time, so that the organization would be able to achieve its goal effectively. Just one wrong decision in the process would prove to be costly to the entire enterprise. A wrong placement in the organization would adversely affect the productivity of the organization as a whole. So right people at the right place at the right time, and so many times have we heard that he or she is not fit for the role, is a misfit for the role? So one person, one wrong hire, especially at the mid-management senior level, can be very harmful for the organization. Can completely change the fortune of an organization, right? Extremely important. So that's where I think the staffing process comes into play. Manpower planning, also known as human resource planning. So basically, in simple words, we all know what manpower planning is, right? It's basically look at the objectives, look at the number of people required for a particular type of job, look at the departmental requirements, look at the skills of those requirements, look at what support or what training intervention would. So basically, it's the crux, or it's the mainstay of the staffing piece. Manpower planning is to get a comprehensive understanding of the type of people you want to get on board for your departments, for your organization. Recruitment, okay, in simple words, you know what recruitment is, right? Recruitment is hiring people. Recruitment is getting people filled for those vacancies or for those job positions in your organizations or in your respective departments. Okay, the talent acquisition team or the recruitment team is the team responsible for recruitment. Selection, okay, now I'm on a lighter note, all of us have said and heard apply, and no reply, right? Be it on Naukri or any other job portal. Selection is the most critical step in the staffing process, and it involves choosing candidates who meet the best qualification and requirements of the job. So basically selecting the ideal candidate, selecting the right candidate as per the requirement, as per the skill sets, as per the culture of the department, as per the culture of the organization. Training. It is the process of increasing the knowledge and skills of an employee for doing a particular job. The objective of training is to achieve a change in the behavior of those trained. Okay. So basically, when I say behavior, I feel here what they mean is to make the employee more confident. Now, you need to be trained for that job for which you are hired. Okay, you might be extremely qualified guy, but then that job or that task that you are hired for requires certain specific pieces for which training is integral, right? So you need the training, you need the process training, you need the skill training to make you confident or make the employee confident that he or she is able to take on that responsibility. And I think that's where they mean by a change in the behavior of those trained, right? So from someone who's not very sure or who's not very confident to someone who's very confident that he or she can undertake that task or that activity. Placement and induction. Placement refers to assigning rank and responsibility to an individual, identifying him with a particular job. If a person adjusts to the job and continues to perform per expectation, it means that the candidate is properly placed. However, if the candidate is seen to have problem in adjusting himself to the job, the supervisor must find out whether the person is properly placed as per the latter's aptitude and potential. Induction refers to the introduction of a person to the job and the organization. The purpose is to make the employee feel at home and develop a sense of pride in the organization and commitment to the job. Proper induction would enable the employee to get off to a good start and develop his overall effectiveness on the job and enhance his potential. Right, so placement is basically placing, as we discussed, is placing the right person in the right job. Whether the person is doing well as per his aptitude and attitude. If not doing well, is it to do with skills? Can that person be placed in some other department if it is a skill issue, or it could be a will issue also, which is not discussed here, right? So it's not always basic skill that a person is absorbed into some other department. It is also that the intent of the person is not there to do. So the person has got a behavioral issue, the person has got a will issue. That is something, that needs to be dealt in a separate manner, and that's where your performance management, your disciplinary actions, these sort of things, they come into play, right? Induction is to basically induct or make the employee feel at home. We all have been inducted at some point in time, to make the employee comfortable, to ensure that the employee is able to navigate through the organization in his initial or in her initial days, is able to understand the complexities, is able to understand and gel with the culture of the organization. Okay. Sources of recruitment. Sources of recruitment, the important sources of recruitment are internal and external sources. The internal sources are your referrals, right? Your word of mouth, Employees include the employees on the people from within are generally upgraded whenever a vacancy arises. Also a promotion, internal movements. By reviewing the personal records and skills, the manager would be in a position. Okay, here they are talking about promotion. Okay, transfers of promotion. Okay, so internal sources basically, or also referrals, which are not mentioned here. Basically, if I refer someone, from some other department or someone I know, they're also talking about transfers from other departments, or they're also talking about internal job postings or IJPs, where internally people are promoted, people who have been doing well, they found their skills are found to be appropriate, and their record is very consistent, and they are deemed to be ready for the next level, and they have a proven track record. Okay, now the advantages of internal resources. Recruitment from within encourages the employees to work efficiently to reach top positions. The organizations would be able to choose the right people for the vacant positions on the basis of the track record. Employees need little training as they know the major operations and function of the organization. The expenditure is relatively less when compared to external sources of recruitment. Internal recruitment improves the morale of the employees as they are sure that they would be preferred over the outsiders for higher positions. Okay, so nothing new, nothing that we have not heard of or we have not experienced. Obviously, primary advantages is your employee morale is high because someone from internal is promoted. People can look up to that person, people can benchmark that person as a performance and strive towards attaining that benchmark. The learning curve is less since the guy is internally promoted. He or she knows the various elements of the function, the various elements of the responsibility. From a compensation standpoint also, it works out to be cost effective, because externally if you hire people, that's going to be more costly compared to internal hires, right? So broadly, I mean, there's nothing that we don't know about these things, but it's good to go through them. Limitations: in the long run, it's not a healthy sign for the organization to rely on the existing employments. It discourages new blood from entering into the organization. The organization may be deprived of young talent that flows into the industry. The internal sources of recruitment promotes sycophancy and favoritism. Workers may be recruited not because of their suitability for the jobs, because they maintain good relations with the top management, may become obsolete, and the organization may have to resort to external recruitment. Universally accepted disadvantage of internal recruitment is the Peter principle, which states that the people are promoted until they finally reach to the level of incompetence. Okay, very, very important. 2-3 things we want to touch upon, and we know also. You see a lot of lobbies being formed, right? You have so in the long run, if you are in the same position, you're not open to ideas, you're not open to experimentation. In a way, you have a less appetite to risks, right? So plus it discourages the flow of fresh ideas. People from outside, they get fresh blood, referred to as fresh blood, they get fresh ideas, infusion of new ideas, new ways of thinking. All those things don't come in. Commonly known, right? People are promoted because of favoritism. Then there is sycophancy. In simple Hindi, it's chamchagiri, right? Not necessarily on merit. There is bias. Again, it affects your culture. It affects the morale of good performers. Especially if you see a low performing guy is promoted, nothing affects the morale of a good performing employee more than that, right? Or let's say people closer to the management, they get promoted even if they are inefficient. That sends the wrong signals to the talented people in the organization, something we've all have seen and witnessed. Okay, skills. Again, you are so comfortable, you're in your comfort zone, your skills are obsolete, right? Suddenly, let's say something like e-commerce. What happened to e-commerce? E-commerce adoption went 10 folds in 90 days because of COVID. I might not have the skills. Today, tell me one retailer who does not have an omni-channel way of selling. You cannot just rely on your stores. You need to have your online portal. You need to have your digital platform, right? So skills may not be relevant. I might be in the same position for 10 years, and I'm not bothered to move up, or I'm not bothered to learn, and that's in a way going to impact the skills that my organization has, because tomorrow if there's something new that comes up or something that we need to adapt to, then we don't have the workforce which have those skills. Most importantly, this means the Peter principle is people are just promoted because of tenure. Okay, they just because they're tenured, they've been a part of the batch, or let's say they've been with the founder since 10 years, they are promoted, they keep getting promotions until a point where incompetency is figured out. And that's what, where it is figured out that the person is not fit for the role, the person does not have the skills, which we discovered a point earlier. The skills are obsolete or outdated for the person because the person has never bothered to upgrade himself or herself, right? So that's very, very detrimental for an organization, because people keep getting promotions, meaning they reach a level where they can influence cultures, they can influence performance, they can influence retention of people. And if you have a misfit there, it's going to be very dangerous for organizations. External resources, normally recruitment from external resources would be done whether either the existing employees are inadequate to occupy the vacant positions, or they are not properly qualified and skilled enough to occupy the positions, or they are unfit either by virtue of their age or specialization. Okay, so externally you hire when internally you don't see that skill set or you don't see that thought process. You need to hire people externally, right? So you are looking at external candidates, people who you can get from outside to lead functions, to lead teams. Okay, employment exchanges, you know, Naukris of the world, the .coms, the IIM jobs of the world, okay, of recruitment for skilled. Okay, employment exchanges is one area where employment boards or social employment boards like your LinkedIn, okay, that's not mentioned here, they are your sources. Increasingly, a lot of recruitment these days happen through LinkedIn. In fact, my last 3 jobs I got through LinkedIn. Okay, advertisement in newspapers, I think very selected advertisements you see these days, unless I'm terribly wrong. I think Economic Times has some advertisements, and I see some advertisements in Midday, but you don't see advertisements that many these days, right, in newspapers or journals, unless you need to hire select positions. But that's one way to, I think a generation back they used to hire people through advertisements. Educational institutions, campus hiring, especially for large IT companies, it's a very known entry to the talent pool. Okay, they hire in numbers, they hire in bulk, and do campus training. A lot of organizations tie up with prospective institutions in anticipation of demand in the coming months or in the coming years, right? Employee walk-ins, common, right? We all know what employee walk-ins is. You just but does not happen for all levels. You know that there are interviews going on for specific roles or specific positions in this organization, and people tend to go and attend those interviews. Employee referrals, this is what I was referring to. People refer, look at roles and see if they can refer someone in their circle, their friends, acquaintances, family, etc. Gate hiring is no longer applicable. Miscellaneous gate hiring is the most popular one, in which people are hired at the factory gate itself, and that's where I said that not everything that you study here is relevant, right? Now, how many times have you seen that you go and stand outside a factory gate and you get hired, right? First and foremost, how many factories do you see in tier 1 cities these days, right? Mumbai used to be a hub for your textile mills, for your textile factories. Now all those factories are defunct, right? So maybe one way of hiring, but definitely not applicable to this era. Okay, external sources of recruitment offers the following: can choose from wide spectrum of external source of recruitment, and the organization can choose the better candidates carefully after weighing the pros and cons, can avoid bias to some personnel by following external sources of recruitment, subjective judgment. Okay, so basically you have a wide pool of candidates from other companies, people from various backgrounds, skill sets that you can choose from. You can have a proper pros and cons, you can compare candidates, you can do various sort of interviews, various sort of aptitude tests, do what you want, but select the best. Okay, can avoid bias to some personnel by following. Okay, so basically, external source of recruitment. So there's no, unless very rare that I'm hiring someone I know, right? But otherwise, subjective element is ruled out because there is a proper evaluation method in place. There are pros and cons which are looked at, correct? Limitations: person chosen from external sources may cause dissatisfaction among the existing employees. It would be demoralizing to the existing employees when they come to know that the organizations are considering the outsiders for filling up top positions. Very common, people may feel that he or she or they are in line for the next position. That is again their own interpretation, but they feel demotivated when they see people are coming from outside, people come from other companies and they're leading teams. So this is very common, but it's a part and parcel. External sources of recruitment is quite costly to the enterprise. Firms have to spend heavily on advertisement, and sometimes the response from potential candidates may be dismal and disappointing. It is customary to pay the expenses of candidates. Okay, right. So basically the cost part of it, especially if, and see, that's where again, it's subjective, right? Now, gone are the days when you used to attend, take flights and attend interviews, go to the headquarters. A lot of interviews these days are done virtual, correct? And if you spend and the output, and I think this is more to do with external hiring, right? Let's say if you're hiring freshers from the campus and you spend a lot of money on activities, marketing activities, advertisements, etc. And if the output or the churn is not that, if the output and the number of candidates are not that money, then there's no return on investment. But I think both of these problems are in a way tackled, because most of the hiring, and even at the senior level, happens online. I mean, happens on LinkedIn, and there are virtual interviews. Secondly, a lot of these companies these days do campus interviews, right? Right. So selection. Perhaps the most critical stage in the staffing process is the selection. Selection is very crucial because any errors in the selection may prove costly to the organization itself. This explains the reason why selection has occupied a place of prominence in the management literature. Selection is a process of rejection, and hence it's called a negative process. It divides the people into two categories, i.e. those who would be selected and those who would be rejected. A manager should exercise special skill in selecting these candidates. The position of selecting the candidates for employment in organization is a long process, I agree. It consists of the following process: application blank. Okay, so selection is a negative process. If there's only one role, depends on the role. The ratio is always, so let's say if there are two roles and there are 100 candidates, the ratio is 2:100, 1:50. So 98 people are going to get rejected and 2 people are going to get selected. So that's why it's called a negative process. Not every person is selected, and it's with the right intent, because it's better to be safe than be sorry. You cannot end up selecting the wrong candidate. Again, not necessary. No one fills a blank application these days. This is not relevant, but it's given here. Application blank is basically when people used to fill those paper forms. These days, everything happens online. You have your application tracking systems, or ATS, for organizations, which tracks your entire recruitment cycle, right from the time you are called to your first interview to your second interview. Everything is online. So I mean, this is obsolete or outdated. Preliminary interviews. So again, you don't want to waste the stakeholders' time, right? So a lot of times you delegate the interview to your teams. You see that basic tick marks are in place, so basic criteria of like qualification. Let's say you need BCom, but the guy is undergraduate, so you would filter that, right? Let's say there's a compensation range. Let's say a position is 10 to 12 lakhs and the guy is sitting at, let's say, 15 lakhs. That guy is ruled out. So basic preliminary interview to see the the precursors, right, for the role, so that the time is invested wisely. The filtration or the elimination process happens in a seamless manner. Employment tests to match individuals' mental and physical characteristics. Okay, so aptitude tests, psychological tests, So many tests. I'm sure we have heard and we've experienced these tests. Very common is the aptitude and the psychological test, these days for positions across levels, especially if it's a core skill that people are looking at. You can have skill-based aptitude tests. So those tests are a part of the selection process. Final interviews is perhaps the most crucial step in the selection process. A careful assessment of the candidate is made in the personal interview with the candidate. The purpose of conducting the employment interviews is to assess the candidate. Okay, so essentially, it is the final interview, correct? It's the interview that is going to make or break the selection. You have to impress or you have to influence the stakeholders who are going to make the decision, because they would have certain criteria that they're trying to gauge or they're trying to evaluate. Certain skill sets are mandated for the job, and then accordingly, you're selected or rejected, and then you get a nice toned down email. Sorry for you're not being considered at this moment, but we'll definitely keep your profile for future requirements. That's more like a balm, right? Background investigation, extremely important. Okay, these days, at least the large organizations, they do a criminal check, they do a fraud check, anti-money laundering. Some companies also do a prevention of sexual harassment post check. Okay, so background checks are very, very important, so that not only your organizational reputation is important, but also the environment for your employees need to be safe, right? Your employees possibly should not be sitting, let's say a team should not be sitting in a new induct who has a murder record, okay, someone has criminal records because he's been a thief in the past, or your fake education degrees are very common, right? So you have your blacklisted universities these days, which are there listed for all the organizations. So background check is extremely important, so that first your records are authentic, right? Whatever you say is true. You have those degrees, you have that qualification. Two is the other factors are extremely important to ensure that the environment is safe for the existing employees, and is the person who comes in is amenable to the culture of the organization. Medical examination, all sorts of reports, especially if contagious diseases, there are certain tests that are conducted, which is important. Okay, part and parcel of the recruitment process, we are all aware of, right? Final selection and placement. So after clearing a long mammoth marathon, your tests and everything, there is a final selection, basically a placement, something that you get from the organization, which says that okay, you've been selected, you've been rejected, and then there is an appointment letter that is sent to you. Sometimes there is a pre-appointment letter or an offer letter that is first sent to you. You send a conditional acceptance. You may or you might not have certain questions. Then basis which a formal appointment letter is sent, which you have to sign and give it back. Dates are mentioned, certain clauses are mentioned, so on and so forth, right? So that's the selection process, or the selection process of potential employees. So like I said, there's nothing new here, or there's nothing that we don't know or we have not experienced. It's just that these are pieces of the jigsaw which is important from an overall management perspective, because you need to have right people at the right place, and certain procedures need to be followed. Okay, so I'll stop there today. I mean, we've covered quite a bit, and when we start next, we start with training and development. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions or any suggestions, any feedback, any clarifications, please share it with the group. And I would, if time permits, I would request you or urge you to go through whatever has been covered until now. Thank you very much. See you next time. Have a great weekend.